Hello Netrunner fans, Willingdone here, and I'm back for another deck overview video. In this one I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite competitive runner decks, that's Chaos Theory Big Rig. Decks similar to this one have popped up at a variety of tournaments throughout the latter half of 2014 and the beginning of 2015, offering Shaper players an alternative to the very popular prepaid Kate deck. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the basic strategy of the deck, then we're going to look at the individual card choices, and finally we'll talk about some of the matchups for the deck. A good Shaper deck is all about flexible solutions and seizing opportunities as they're presented to you. If everything's going as planned, the Corp is never going to be able to build an ice wall that we can't penetrate. We're going to leverage the fact that we play an incredible toolbox of some of the best icebreakers in the game to very cost-effectively break our opponent's ice. We can use some of the efficiency that we save on breaking the ice to click Magnum Opus or develop our rig, keeping pace with the Corp's economy and giving us late-game inevitability. Additionally, bombs like Stimhack are going to make sure that we have the power we need to overwhelm any opponent's defense. To start the discussion of the cards in the deck, I'd like to talk about why we would choose Chaos Theory over some of the other Shaper IDs. Just as efficiency is going to be very important for our Icebreaker setup, so too is it going to be important for our deck composition. Not only are we going to get to play a smaller deck than the average Shaper, but we're also going to use the +1 MU as our ID ability to avoid having to play additional MU cards in our deck. The 5 base MU is also going to critically allow us to have two MU cards in play, as well as a single MU card. A lot of times this is going to mean that we have a Magnum Opus, self-modifying code, and some sort of Icebreaker. That's going to get us into a lot of servers early in the game. Even though we're losing the economic advantage from Kate's ID ability, we're going to gain some of that back in being able to fully take advantage of Personal Workshop. This card doesn't really work very well with Kate's ID ability, since you won't get to capitalize on it if you install off of the Personal Workshop. Like with other aspects of this deck, the economy is extremely compact. Magnum Opus is going to be our main source of credit generation. Ideally, we want to have one of these really early in the game, preferably in the starting hand. The nice thing about Magnum Opus is that we can spend 1 or 2 clicks making runs or somehow attacking the opponent, and then use the rest of our turn to get a few credits back with Magnum. If we start to see our opponent's economy stagnate, we can always use Magnum Opus to click for a whole turn. There's no way a Corp's going to keep up with that unless they have additional money cards themselves. Personal Workshop is the other cornerstone of this deck's economy. It's going to allow us to reduce the cost of our very expensive rig, and it's also going to make sure that we can time our programs out correctly. We don't want to have all of our programs installed taking up MU before they're necessary. Combined with Stimhack, we're going to be able to really cheat the cost of our rig and be sure that we can afford to pump the strength and break subroutines. Keep in mind that we can use Personal Workshop during a run. This is going to let us spend the 9 credits from Stimhack on the workshop to install important cards to play and then use our Icebreakers as well. Stimhack also has nice synergy with both self-modifying code and clone chip for the same reason. Rounding out our economy are a couple copies of Modded. This card's been attempted in a lot of different Shaper decks, and I think it's generally been pretty bad, but this deck has just so many targets for it. We have a bunch of hardware, a lot of Icebreakers, and we play 3 copies of Magnum Opus. Now that we've seen what the economy is capable of, let's look at some of the bombs that we're going to play with that economy. Multi-access is going to be the name of our late game. For this reason, we're going to dedicate a lot of our deck slots to getting additional accesses on both R&D and HQ. 3 copies of R&D Interface are going to ensure that we at least get 1 or 2 of them to the table before the end of the game. Combined with the Maker's Eye, we're going to be able to make some really deep dig R&D runs late in the game. HQ Interface is going to make sure that we can get into HQ and find the agendas that our opponent's holding there. Combined with Sneakdoor Beta, this is going to give us a powerful way to both pressure archives and to make sure that we find those agendas hiding in HQ. Sneakdoor is a terribly nasty surprise for an unsuspecting corporation, especially if you can get an HQ interface in play beforehand. Once we've gotten into HQ and scored their agenda, we can just scavenge the Sneakdoor into another Icebreaker. Speaking of Icebreakers, these are the absolute heart of this deck. To deal with barriers, we're going to play Cerberus Lady H1. This is both good against high strength barriers, as well as barriers with multiple subroutines. And even though this card has a limited lifespan, we have a lot of different ways to reset those counters in our deck. Gordian Blade is going to be our decoder. This is about as standard as it gets when it comes to getting through code gates, and Gordian Blade is just going to be a solid way to deal with a variety of code gate threats. Since sentries tend to be particularly taxing, we're going to play two different ways to deal with them. The first is Mimic. This is really good against stuff like Caduceus or Architect, and is going to just let us get through a variety of really annoying ice. Femme Fatale can also deal with sentries, though we primarily include it for the bypass effect. Actually, in a lot of situations, we're going to be able to use both. Let's take a look at a common tactical play that we can make to invalidate two of our opponent's ice with a single Femme Fatale. In this example, we're playing against Jinteki Replicating Perfection. Our opponent has kept us out of HQ with the two pieces of ice, and we haven't really found a solution to the Tsurugi. Our opponent just installed a new remote server with an advanced card and a new piece of ice. Since we're pretty sure that's an agenda, let's make a go for it. We can test run for Femme Fatale, marking the remote piece of ice. This is going to let us break our opponent's Tsurugi, and then still be able to bypass whatever thing they res on that remote. The last icebreaker is perhaps the most important, and that's David. Not only is David going to deal with high strength ice of any type, it's also going to make sure that we don't have to overspend pumping the strength of our conventional icebreakers. Combine that with the fact that we have lots of ways to recur and search for it, and David's going to be an absolute cornerstone to the way we get into large servers. Now that we've seen the various components of the rig, let's look at the ways that we can find those cards and continuously recur them. Diesel is going to give us a much needed way to cheaply draw some cards, though we're probably going to have to spend a few clicks throughout the course of the game drawing some cards manually. Self-modifying code is an all-around decent tutor effect. It's going to be nice early in the game for setting up the critical icebreaker or two that we need, and as mentioned before, it has really good synergy with Stimhack. Clone Chip's going to be nice to just give us some general recursion. It's a good way to reset the counters on either David or Lady, and it's nice if we somehow lose our Magnum Opus or one of our critical breakers. And Same Old Thing is going to allow us to replay some of our bomb events like Stimhack. Test Run is going to be an expensive but extremely versatile way to either recur or tutor for an important card. Popular targets are either Femme Fatale, Sneakdoor Beta, or David. I especially like the David play because we can find the David, break a bunch of stuff and use the counters, and then put it on top of our deck to use again later. Test Run's also really good with the most versatile and most powerful recursion card in the deck, and that's Scavenge. From cheating the cost of an icebreaker like I just mentioned, to switching out icebreakers for one another, to refreshing the counters on either Lady or David, or even switching your Magnum Opus out for a bomb icebreaker, the number of lines of play with this card are nearly limitless. Sometimes you're going to have to make some funky or outside-of-the-box plays with this card, but I think Scavenge is a big reason why the rig of this deck is so flexible and ever-changing. The last few cards of this deck are pretty flexible, and you can really just play whatever you need to play for your particular metagame. Right now, I like to play a couple anti-Jinteki cards in the form of Feedback Filter and Deus X, and I like to play one copy of Dinosaurus to help deal with really big ice late game. Feel free to switch these out for other cards that might help you, like Plascrete Carapace against Scorched Earth, Ottman or Cybercypher against certain ice that you might encounter, or Net Celebrity to help deal with currents. Now that we've looked at the cards that are in the deck, let's take a look at some of the specific matchups against popular Corp archetypes. I originally started working on this deck as a solution to Near Earth Hub, So in general, I think that's my favorite matchup and somewhat the easiest matchup for this deck. It's really hard to consistently get over about a 60% win rate against Near Earth Hub just because they're so explosive and it's so easy for them to rando win. But I think in general, as long as we focus on R&D and really leverage both Stimhack and Sneakdoor Beta, we can easily win this matchup. It's so hard for them to rush out agendas against us because we're really good at getting into whatever server they try to set up on their remotes. So I think in general, try to keep some credits, make it difficult for them to score, and then if you haven't got into R&D a while and you suspect a lot of things in HQ, you can pull out the Sneak Door and really wreck them. I'd really like to try to get 2 or 4 points off of R&D early, use Sneak Door to maybe get another agenda or two, and then finish the game with some big deep digs with the Maker's Eye and R&D Interface. The biggest reason a lot of players choose Replicating Perfection is that it's very consistent and has very even matchups across the board. Inasmuch as it's possible to have a good matchup on RP, I think we have one. Early in the game, we're going to be able to use Magnum Opus to deal with their asset economy, and generally it's worth it to spend the whole turn dealing with their Sundew or whatever. We're definitely going to want to get into R&D as much as we can, and when we do, we want to have credits so that we can trash their Caprice, asset economy, Ash, or steal their agendas. Without asset economy, it's really difficult for the RP player to keep pace with Magnum Opus using only their operation economy. Generally, RP only plays Celebrity Gift and Hedge Fund outside of the asset economy, and I don't think those can really keep up with Magnum Opus generally. Another big piece of advice that I have is that while we want to multi-access as much as possible, we don't want to spend a lot of credits on hardware or superfluous breakers that aren't going to quickly pay off. The credits are going to be really tight against such a taxing deck, and you really need to think before you spend a lot of credits putting something down to the table. Against PE, I think we have one of the best overall late games, which is Magnum Opus plus Feedback Filter, but it can be extremely difficult to get to the point of the game where you have both of those cards, especially since we generally only play one Feedback Filter. This matchup's pretty winnable if we focus on their unadvanced remotes and R&D. I really like to play one R&D interface to the table, but I try to avoid playing Maker's Eye or multiple R&D interfaces unless I already have the feedback filter and a ton of credits. If you choose to not play the feedback filter, I think you can really be in some trouble against PE, so I would really recommend considering using one of your flexible slots for a one-of feedback filter. Blue Sun is something of a mixed bag. Generally, their ice is pretty easy for us to defeat, especially since we have Lady and David, and we can really wreck their huge single server with those two cards. That said, if they're playing Scorched Earth, it can be really hard to beat them, and I would say is probably overall the worst matchup, just because it's so hard to keep pace with their massive, incredibly strong economy. Magnum Opus isn't going to be good enough if they're constantly producing as many credits as most Blue Suns decks play, but if they're not playing Scorched Earth, I think you're probably in the clear. Unfortunately, it can be really difficult to determine whether or not they are playing it, so in general, this is a good argument for playing some Plascrete Carapaces in your flexible slots if you're worried about facing Blue Sun at your next tournament. Well, that's going to do it for my Chaos Theory Big Rig overview. I hope you can have some fun with this deck and that you like this video. In general, I don't find that this deck is as consistent or as powerful as a lot of the Tier 1 runners like Andromeda, but I think a lot of Corp opponents do not have experience against this kind of thing, and we have a lot of really nasty surprises if they aren't expecting them. So this might be a good choice for your next tournament to shake up your local metagame or just generally put people off base. I think that this deck is right under Tier 1, probably in the 1.5 range, and is certainly not a terrible choice if you're taking it to a big tournament. Thanks a lot for watching, and if you liked the video, please press subscribe and the button that looks like a thumbs up, and I'll see you again for some more Netrunner stuff.